The air tasted stale in Neo-Hanoi, even with the premium-grade oxygen filter mask that Dr. Lei Mingkoi wore. He adjusted it slightly as he walked through the crowded street market, where vendors sold everything from synthetic proteins to air purification upgrades. Above them all, the massive glass dome that encased the city gleamed in the morning light, a constant reminder of humanity's desperate attempt to survive. The year was 2150, and Earth had changed beyond recognition. The great atmospheric crisis a century ago had left the planet's air nearly unbreathable, with oxygen levels dropping to dangerous lows. What was once free had become the most valuable resource on the planet, and those who controlled it, the oxygen merchants, controlled everything else. Koi glanced at his wrist monitor. His family's monthly oxygen allocation was running low again, despite his position as a senior biogenetic agricultural scientist at the Neo-Hanoi Research Institute. Even with his credentials, he couldn't escape the crushing economics of breathing. "Daddy!" called a small voice. His daughter Lynn, 8 years old and wearing a child-sized respiratory mask, ran toward him through the market crowd. Her school uniform was pristine, the emblem of the AriCorp Educational Division prominently displayed on her chest. "Lynn, what are you doing here? School doesn't end for another 3 hours." Koi knelt to her level, checking the seal on her mask automatically. "Teacher sent us home. The air filtration system in our classroom failed again." She spoke matter-of-factly, having never known a world where such occurrences weren't normal. "They said it might be fixed by tomorrow." Koi frowned. This was the third time this month. Despite AriCorp's promises of educational excellence, their commitment seemed to extend only to children whose parents could afford the highest-tier oxygen plans. "Come on, then. You can help me in the laboratory today." He took her small hand, noting how thin it felt. The nutrient-poor synthetic food supplements, all they could afford after oxygen payments, weren't providing everything a growing child needed. They passed a massive digital billboard displaying AriCorp's smiling CEO, Madame Hannah Reyes. "Breathing life into humanity's future," proclaimed the slogan beneath her perfect face. Koi averted his eyes. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Neo-Hanoi Research Institute stood as one of the few buildings not emblazoned with AriCorp's logo. Founded before the Great Atmospheric Crisis, it maintained a degree of independence, though its funding had been slashed repeatedly over the decades. Now, it survived on a skeleton crew of dedicated scientists, working for the promise of discovery rather than wealth. Koi swiped his badge at the entrance, and the airlock engaged, cycling through decontamination protocols before allowing them inside. The building's air was cleaner than outside, but still carried the metallic taste of recycled oxygen. "Dr. Koi, you're early today," called Professor Nguyen, the elderly head of agricultural biotechnology. "And with an assistant. I see." Lynn beamed at the recognition, removing her mask as they entered the laboratory's protected environment. School filtration failure again," Koi explained, removing his own mask and taking a deep breath of the relatively clean air. "I'll be continuing the gene sequencing from yesterday." Professor Nguyen nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The moss samples?" "Yes. I believe they hold potential for enhanced oxygen production." Koi led Lynn to his workstation, setting her up with a tablet loaded with educational programs, while he prepared his equipment. What he didn't tell Professor Nguyen was that he'd been working on a side project for months now, genetically modifying certain hardy plants to dramatically increase their oxygen output while requiring minimal resources. If successful, such plants could potentially be grown anywhere, even in the wasteland outside the dome cities. It was a dream that kept him going through the increasingly difficult days. Hours passed as Koi lost himself in his work, occasionally checking on Lynn, who had fallen asleep on the small cot in the corner of the lab. The quiet hum of equipment and the rhythmic sound of air cycling through the ventilation system created a peaceful backdrop. The laboratory computer beeped, signaling that the analysis was complete. Coy's eyes widened as he reviewed the results. The modified moss strain had exceeded all expectations, producing oxygen at a rate nearly 10 times that of normal plants, while requiring minimal nutrients and water. "This can't be right," he muttered, running the analysis again. But the results were the same. His heart raced. If these results could be replicated on a larger scale, with hardier plants, it could change everything. Oxygen wouldn't need to be manufactured and controlled by corporations like AriCorp. It could be freely generated, returning some semblance of the natural cycle that had sustained Earth for billions of years before human interference. Coy quickly saved the data to his personal encrypted drive and deleted the original files from the laboratory system. What he had discovered was too valuable and too dangerous to leave unprotected. AriCorp had spies everywhere, and research that threatened their monopoly had a way of disappearing. As if summoned by his thoughts, the laboratory door hissed open, and 3 figures in expensive business attire entered. At their center was a woman Coy had only seen on billboards and news broadcasts, Madame Hannah Reyes herself, CEO of AriCorp. "Dr. Lei Ming-Coy," she said, her voice smooth and cultured. "I've heard impressive things about your work." Coy stood, instinctively moving to stand between the visitors and his sleeping daughter. "Madame Reyes, this is unexpected. The best visits often are." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold and calculating as they swept across the laboratory. "We at AriCorp have been monitoring your research with great interest, particularly your work on oxygen-producing plant modifications." A chill ran down Coy's spine. How did they know? He'd been careful, compartmentalizing his research, working after hours. "My research is preliminary," he said carefully. "Nothing worth corporate attention yet." "On the contrary," Reyes gestured, and one of her assistants handed her a tablet. "Your most recent results are quite remarkable. 10 times normal oxygen production with minimal resource input? That's exactly the kind of innovation AriCorp values." She turned the tablet toward him, displaying the very results he had just encrypted and deleted. "We would like to offer you an exclusive contract," Reyes continued. "Full funding, state-of-the-art facilities, and of course, premium oxygen allocation for you and your daughter. All we ask in return is proprietary rights to your research." Coy's mind raced. They had been monitoring his computer, reading his results in real time. The implications were terrifying. "I appreciate the offer," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But I believe this research has humanitarian applications that should be widely available." Reyes's smile tightened. "Dr. Coy, perhaps I wasn't clear. This isn't merely an offer. AriCorp has invested billions in oxygen production and distribution infrastructure. We can't allow unregulated alternatives to disrupt the market." She glanced meaningfully at Lynn, still asleep on the cot. "Especially not when those alternatives could potentially be dangerous if improperly implemented. Children are particularly vulnerable to oxygen fluctuations, aren't they?" The threat was unmistakable. "You have 24 hours to consider our generous offer," she said, her voice hardening. "I strongly suggest you make the right decision, for everyone's sake." With that, she and her entourage left, leaving Coy standing in the suddenly stifling laboratory, his discovery both a miracle and a potential death sentence. He couldn't sleep that night. Lynn had sensed his distress, though he tried to hide it, and it had taken longer than usual to get her settled in their small apartment. Now he sat at their kitchen table, the encrypted data drive in front of him, weighing impossible options. If he signed with AriCorp, his discovery would become another tool for them to profit from, likely sold at premium prices that only the wealthy could afford. The inequality would deepen, but he and Lynn would be safe, comfortable even. If he refused, Reyes's veiled threat echoed in his mind. AriCorp controlled everything: housing, food distribution, education, and, most critically, oxygen. They could make life impossible for him and Lin with the press of a button. There was a third option, though it seemed almost as dangerous as refusing outright. The resistance movement known as Ki Thun, pure air, had been growing in recent years. They advocated for equitable oxygen distribution and fought against AeroCorp's monopoly through both legal channels and more clandestine means. Making contact with them would be risky, but they might have the resources to protect his research and help implement it for the benefit of all. Dawn was breaking when Coy made his decision. He would need to move quickly. The next morning, he sent Lin to school with extra ration credits for emergency oxygen if needed, then made his way to one of the few remaining independent markets in Neo-Hanoi. Located in what had once been the Old Quarter, it operated in a semi-legal gray area, tolerated by authorities because it served as a safety valve for social tensions. Coy navigated through stalls, selling refurbished air filters and bootleg oxygen canisters, looking for the sign he'd been told about. A small, blue lotus painted on a wooden post. Finding it at last, he approached the elderly woman, tending the stall of medicinal herbs. "I'm looking for something to help me breathe easier," he said, using the code phrase he'd learned through careful inquiry. The woman studied him for a long moment, her weathered face revealing nothing. "Not everything that helps us breathe comes in a can," she finally replied. "Sometimes, what we need is a change of air." Relief washed over him. The counter-phrase confirmed she was a Ki Thun contact. "I have something that might interest your associates," he said quietly. "Something that could change everything." She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Return at closing. Someone will meet you." Coy spent the rest of the day in agitated anticipation, checking his wrist monitor repeatedly for messages from Lin's school and watching for any sign of AeroCorp surveillance. When evening came, he collected Lin from a neighbor's apartment and gave her strict instructions to stay inside with the doors locked until he returned. "Where are you going, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. "Just to meet some colleagues," he assured her. "I won't be long. Remember, don't open the door for anyone but me." The market was nearly deserted when he returned. Most stalls were closed. Their owners retreated to whatever shelter they could afford. The old woman was packing her herbs, but she stopped when she saw him. "Through there," she said, gesturing to a narrow alley behind her stall. "They're waiting." The alley led to a nondescript door that opened into what appeared to be an abandoned restaurant kitchen. 3 people waited inside. A stern-faced woman in her 50s, a young man with burn scars visible on his hands and neck, and a tall, broad-shouldered man who stepped forward as Coy entered. "I'm Bao," he said without preamble. "Former AeroCorp engineer. Now I work with Ki Thun. You have something to share?" Coy hesitated only briefly before taking out the data drive. "I've discovered a plant gene modification that could revolutionize oxygen production. It's sustainable, efficient, and could potentially be implemented worldwide." "And AeroCorp knows about it," Bao stated, rather than asked. "Yes. Madame Reyes herself visited my laboratory yesterday. They've given me 24 hours to sign over exclusive rights." The scarred young man whistled. "The CEO personally? Your discovery must be significant." "Or threatening," the older woman said grimly. "I'm Mai. I coordinate our scientific resources. May I?" She gestured to the data drive. Coy handed it over, and she inserted it into a heavily modified computer terminal. As the data loaded, her expression changed from professional interest to open amazement. "This is remarkable," she breathed. "The oxygen production rates are unprecedented, and the resource requirements are minimal." "Could it work outside the domes?" Bao asked intently. "Theoretically, yes," Coy replied. "The modified plants are extremely hardy. They could potentially survive in the wastelands, especially if introduced gradually through protected growth chambers. If we could establish oxygen-producing plants outside the domes, We could break AriCorp's stranglehold, the scarred young man said, excitement building in his voice. It's not that simple, Tung, Bao cautioned. Implementing this would require resources we don't have, and AriCorp won't sit idle while we try. There's more, Koi said, the weight of his situation pressing down on him. Reyes threatened my daughter, indirectly but unmistakably. When I don't show up to sign their contract tomorrow, they'll come looking for me. For us. A heavy silence fell over the room. We can protect you, Bao finally said. We have safe houses. People who can help. But you need to understand, once you commit to this path, there's no going back. AriCorp doesn't forget, and they don't forgive. Koi thought of Lin, waiting alone in their apartment, of the future she faced in a world where she would always be at the mercy of those who controlled the very air she breathed. I understand, he said firmly, but I need to get my daughter first. I'll come with you, Bao offered. The rest of you, prepare the underground laboratory. We need to verify these results and begin scaling up as quickly as possible. The journey back to Koi's apartment was tense, both men hyper-aware of the surveillance cameras that dotted Neo-Hanoi's streets. They took a circuitous route, using the crowded lower levels where monitoring was less comprehensive. How did you come to join Keithan? Koi asked, as they navigated through a particularly dense market area. Bao's expression darkened. I was developing new oxygen extraction technology for AriCorp. Breakthrough stuff that would have made the process 30% more efficient. When I realized they were planning to keep the efficiency gains secret and actually reduce output to drive up prices, I objected. The next day, there was an accident in my laboratory. I barely survived. He gestured to the faint scarring visible at his collar. Burns covered 40% of my body. AriCorp paid for minimal medical treatment, then terminated me for negligence. I'm sorry, Koi said, the words feeling inadequate. Don't be. It opened my eyes. After I recovered, Keithan found me. Been working with them ever since. Bao's voice hardened. AriCorp doesn't care about humanity's survival. They care about profit and control. Your discovery threatens both. They reached Koi's apartment building, a towering structure of modular units stacked like honeycomb cells. The elevator was chronically unreliable, so they climbed 15 flights of stairs. Their breathing labored by the end, despite their filters. Lin, Koi called as he unlocked the door. Daddy's home. Silence greeted them. Lin, he called again, panic rising as he moved through the small apartment. Her room was empty, her school tablet gone. On his bed lay a single message card emblazoned with the AriCorp logo. Insurance, it read simply. Contact us immediately. Koi's world collapsed around him. His knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, the card clutched in his trembling hand. They took her, he whispered. They took my daughter. Bao's face hardened. This changes things. We need to move quickly. He activated a concealed communicator. We have a situation. AriCorp has taken Koi's daughter hostage. Yes. Understood. We're coming in now. He helped Koi to his feet. We're going to get her back, he promised. But first, we need to get you to safety and secure your research. It's what they want, and right now, it's our only leverage. The underground laboratory of Keithan was located beneath what had once been a university, now abandoned after AriCorp consolidated all higher education under their corporate academies. The facility was surprisingly well equipped, though clearly assembled from salvaged and repurposed technology. We've been preparing for years, Mai explained, as she led Koi through the laboratory. Gathering resources, recruiting scientists and engineers who recognized the moral bankruptcy of AriCorp's monopoly. Scientists worked diligently at various stations, some conducting experiments with plant samples, others analyzing data on modified computer systems designed to avoid detection. You're not alone, Dr. Koi, she continued, Many share your vision of freely available oxygen, of returning to a world where breathing isn't a privilege. A silver-haired woman approached them, her posture erect despite her age, her eyes sharp and intelligent behind rimless glasses. Dr. Coy, this is Professor Elena Zhang, leader of the Regeneration Scientific Coalition. Mai introduced. She coordinates our international research efforts. Your work is extraordinary, Professor Elena said, extending her hand. I've just reviewed your data. The implications are profound. Under different circumstances, Coy would have been honored to meet the renowned climatologist whose research had predicted the atmospheric crisis decades before it reached its peak. Now, he could think only of Lynn. They have my daughter, he said, his voice breaking. ArriCorp took her. Professor Elena's expression softened with genuine compassion. I understand your fear. My grandson was held in an ArriCorp re-education facility for 6 months after I refused their employment offer. Her eyes hardened. We got him back. And we will get your daughter back too. How? Coy demanded. ArriCorp controls everything, the police, the courts. Not everything, Bao interrupted, entering the room with Tung and several others Coy hadn't met. We have people inside ArriCorp. Sources tell us Lynn has been taken to their central complex in the executive dome. We need a plan, Mai said firmly. ArriCorp will expect us to act rashly. We won't give them that satisfaction. The World Climate Science Alliance conference is in 3 days. Professor Elena noted. ArriCorp is the primary sponsor, and Madame Reyes is scheduled to announce a breakthrough in oxygen production technology. Her knowing look made it clear what breakthrough Reyes intended to claim. That's our opportunity, Bao said. A global audience, maximum visibility. We expose ArriCorp's tactics while demonstrating the potential of Coy's discovery. And rescue Lynn, Coy insisted. Any plan must prioritize her safety. Absolutely, Professor Elena agreed. In fact, she's central to our strategy. ArriCorp won't harm her because they need her to control you. They'll keep her comfortable, safe, and they'll bring her to the conference as a show of good faith to prove you've willingly signed over your research. Over the next 3 days, Coy worked feverishly with the scientists of Keithon and the Regeneration Coalition. They verified his results, refined the gene modification process, and prepared demonstration plants that showed visibly higher oxygen output. Plants that could tell their story to a world desperate for hope. Meanwhile, Bao and his team formulated their infiltration plan. The executive dome was heavily guarded, its security systems state-of-the-art. But as a former ArriCorp engineer, Bao knew vulnerabilities others didn't. They redesigned their security protocols on a predictable cycle, he explained, as they reviewed holographic schematics of the complex. And they always leave legacy systems in place as backups. Most importantly, they're arrogant. They don't believe anyone would dare challenge them openly. The night before the conference, Coy couldn't sleep. He sat in his assigned quarters in the underground facility, staring at a holographic image of Lynn, laughing, her mask temporarily removed during a rare moment of joy in a garden preserve they had visited on her birthday. I will find you, he whispered to the image. I promise. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Professor Elena, carrying 2 steaming cups. Herbal tea, she said, offering one to him. From actual plants, not synthetic. A small luxury we maintain. Coy accepted gratefully, the warmth of the cup comforting against his palms. I lost my daughter in the Mumbai dome collapse, Elena said quietly after a moment. She was a botanical engineer, working on early oxygen-producing plants. The official report called it a structural failure, but our investigation found evidence of sabotage. ArriCorp was eliminating competition. Coy looked up, shocked. I'm sorry. It was 20 years ago, she said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. My grandson, her son, is why I continue this fight. Every child deserves to breathe free air. Dr. Coy, your daughter, My grandson. All of them. Do you think we can win? He asked. The question that had haunted him for days, finally spoken aloud. AriCorp has everything. Resources, power, control. They have everything except moral authority. Elena replied firmly. And in the end, that matters more than they understand. Humanity stood on the brink of extinction after the atmospheric crisis. We survived because people worked together, shared resources, helped one another. AriCorp's model of hoarding and profiteering is a recent corruption, not the natural state of human society. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. People remember what cooperation feels like, Dr. Coy. They yearn for it. Your discovery isn't just scientifically significant, it's symbolically powerful. It offers a return to what we once had, air as a shared resource, not a commodity. Her words kindled something in Coy that had been smothered by fear and worry. Hope, not just for Lynn's safe return, but for the world she would inherit. Get some rest, Elena advised, rising to leave. Tomorrow will test us all. The World Climate Science Alliance Conference was held in the grand atrium of the Executive Dome, a massive structure of transparent alloy that showcased the lush, oxygen-rich gardens exclusive to AriCorp's elite. Outside, the rest of Neo-Hanoi's citizens wore masks and rationed their breaths. Coy approached the entrance with Professor Elena beside him, both dressed in formal academic attire. Their credentials, meticulously forged by Keithon's technical experts, passed inspection, and they entered the rarefied atmosphere of wealth and privilege. Remember, Elena murmured as they moved through the crowd of scientists, corporate representatives, and political figures. Our team is already in position. Stay focused on the plan. Coy nodded, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of Lynn, while maintaining a facade of professional interest. The air here was different, richer, fresher than anywhere else in the city. Plants grew in abundance, not the struggling specimens found in public areas, but vibrant, healthy vegetation that produced oxygen in quantities ordinary citizens could only dream of. Dr. Coy, a smooth voice called. How pleased I am that you could join us. Madame Reyes approached, resplendent in a tailored suit, the color of fresh leaves. Her smile, as artificial as the environment they stood in. 2 security personnel flanked her, their expressions impassive. Madame Reyes, he acknowledged, fighting to keep his voice steady. Where is my daughter? Safe and comfortable, she assured him, and eager to see her father make the right decision. She gestured toward a private conference room off the main atrium. Shall we finalize our arrangement before the presentation? The contracts are prepared. I'd like to see Lynn first, Coy insisted. Reyes's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. She's waiting in the preparation room. After you sign, you can be reunited immediately. Coy exchanged a glance with Professor Elena, who gave him a subtle nod. This was expected. Reyes wouldn't produce Lynn until she had what she wanted. Very well, he said. Lead the way. As they moved toward the conference room, Coy activated the subdermal communicator, implanted just hours earlier. Proceeding to signing room, he subvocalized. No visual on Lynn yet. Bao's voice came back, barely audible even through the bone conduction technology. Understood. Team A is accessing the security hub now. Team B in position outside the presentation hall. Stand by. The conference room was luxurious, with a wall of glass overlooking an exclusive garden terrace. A document lay on the polished table, the AriCorp logo prominently displayed. A straightforward agreement, Reyes said, gesturing to the contract. You transfer all rights to your oxygen-producing plant modifications to AriCorp. In return, you receive a generous compensation package, continued research funding, and premium living accommodations for you and Lynn. Coy approached the table slowly, buying time. And if I refuse? Reyes's pleasant expression didn't waver, but her eyes grew cold. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved, particularly for a young child whose future prospects would be limited. The communicator vibrated against Koi's skull. "We have visual on target," came Bao's voice. "Lin is in the preparation room adjacent to the main stage. 2 guards, proceeding with extraction." Relief flooded through him. But he maintained his outward appearance of a scientist cornered into submission. "I'll need to review the terms," he said, sitting down and deliberately taking his time with the document. "Of course," Reyes agreed, though impatience flickered across her features. "But we must conclude before my presentation. The world is waiting for AriCorp's latest innovation." Minutes ticked by as Koi pretended to read the contract thoroughly, occasionally asking clarifying questions that Reyes answered with growing irritation. Professor Elena stood by the door, ostensibly as a witness, but in reality, monitoring the corridor outside. "Team B in position," came the update in Koi's ear. "Demonstration plants secured in the presentation hall, awaiting your signal." Finally, Koi set down the document. "I'm prepared to sign," he said, "once I see my daughter." Reyes's smile was triumphant. "I thought you might insist." She pressed a button on her wrist communicator. "Bring in the child." The door opened, and Lin entered, accompanied by a female AriCorp employee dressed as a caretaker. Her eyes lit up when she saw Koi. "Daddy!" she cried, rushing toward him. Koi embraced her fiercely, checking her over for any sign of mistreatment. She appeared physically unharmed, though her eyes held confusion and fear. "They said you gave them your special plants," she whispered. "The ones that make more air." "It's complicated, sweetheart," he murmured. Then looked up at Reyes. "I need a moment with my daughter." "The signing first," Reyes insisted, her patience clearly at its end. "Then all the family reunions you desire." "Extraction team ready," Bao's voice reported. "On your mark." Koi stood, keeping Lin close to his side. "Actually, Madame Reyes, I have a counter-proposal." Her eyebrows rose. "This isn't a negotiation, Dr. Koi." "Oh, but it is." He nodded to Professor Elena, who pressed a button on her own concealed communicator. Immediately, the large display screens throughout the complex, including the one in the conference room, switched from AriCorp promotional material to a live feed from the presentation hall. There, dozens of the modified plants sat in transparent growth chambers, visibly producing oxygen at an accelerated rate. Measurements displayed in real time showed oxygen levels rising steadily. "What is this?" Reyes demanded, her composure cracking. "The truth," Koi said simply. "My discovery, being shared with the world as we speak. The gene modification sequence is being transmitted to research facilities globally. It can't be stopped." As if to confirm his words, the screens split to show multiple video feeds of scientists receiving the data, their expressions changing from surprise to wonder to determination. "You can't do this," Reyes snarled, all pretense of civility gone. "That research belongs to AriCorp. We'll sue you into oblivion." "On what grounds?" Professor Elena asked calmly. "Dr. Koi conducted his research independently. He never signed your contract. And now the world knows what you tried to suppress." "Security!" Reyes shouted into her communicator. "Lock down the presentation hall immediately!" No response came. Instead, the screens showed AriCorp security personnel standing down, some removing their helmets, others simply stepping aside as more of Keithon's people entered the hall. "Your security systems have been compromised," Koi explained. "Courtesy of some former employees who remember what it means to serve humanity rather than corporate interests." Reyes's face contorted with rage. She grabbed Lin's arm, pulling the child roughly away from Koi. "This isn't over," she hissed, backing toward the door, using Lin as a shield. "AriCorp controls the oxygen. We control everything." "Not anymore," came a new voice from the doorway behind her. Bao stood there, accompanied by several members of Keithon and, surprisingly. A contingent of government officials wearing the insignia of the Global Oversight Council, a regulatory body that had been largely symbolic for decades. "Madam Reyes," said the lead official, "you're being detained pending investigation into corporate espionage, extortion, and violations of the Essential Resources Act." "This is absurd," Reyes sputtered, still gripping Lynn's arm. "AriCorp operates within all legal parameters. Our contracts with the governing authorities have been nullified," the official interrupted, "in light of new evidence." He nodded to a screen where documents were being displayed. Internal AriCorp memos detailing deliberate suppression of oxygen production technologies, price fixing, and targeted elimination of competitors. Bao stepped forward. "I kept copies of everything before my accident," he explained, "including the original research that showed Earth's atmosphere could have been substantially restored years ago if AriCorp hadn't interfered." Reyes's eyes darted around the room, calculating. In a sudden movement, she lunged toward the glass wall overlooking the garden terrace, dragging Lynn with her. "Stay back!" she shouted, "or I'll break the environmental seal." The threat was terrifying. The executive dome maintained a higher oxygen concentration than the rest of Neo-Hanoi. A breach would trigger emergency protocols, potentially endangering everyone in the complex. "Let her go, Reyes," Coy said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "It's over." "Nothing is over. AriCorp is essential to humanity's survival." Her free hand moved toward an emergency release panel on the window. What happened next occurred with breathtaking speed. Lynn, though small and frightened, was the daughter of a scientist. She understood what Reyes threatened. With a sudden twist, she bit down hard on the hand that held her, simultaneously stamping on Reyes's instep with all her strength. The CEO's grip loosened in shock and pain. Lynn tore free. Running to her father as security personnel rushed forward to restrain Reyes before she could reach the emergency release. "I want to go home, Daddy," Lynn whispered, trembling in Coy's embrace. "Soon," he promised, kissing the top of her head. "Very soon." The aftermath unfolded rapidly. AriCorp's monopoly, already undermined by the worldwide distribution of Coy's oxygen-producing plant modification, collapsed completely when their internal documents became public. Emergency measures were enacted by the Global Oversight Council, placing oxygen production and distribution under international control while the technology transition took place. 1 month later, Coy stood with Lynn at the edge of Neo-Hanoi's dome, watching as a section of it was carefully removed. Before them stretched the wasteland, the barren, polluted expanse that had once been verdant countryside. "Are you sure it's safe?" Lynn asked, clutching his hand as the airlock prepared to open to the outside world for the first time in decades. "Yes," he assured her, though his own heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. "The test sites have shown remarkable progress." The massive doors slid open, and they stepped through with a group of scientists, engineers, and representatives from the newly formed Global Restoration Initiative. All wore protective suits, not primarily for oxygen, but against the other pollutants that still lingered in the outside air. Before them, stretching across what had once been desolate terrain, grew a vast field of modified plants. Their enhanced biology was visibly at work, processing carbon dioxide and other atmospheric pollutants, releasing oxygen at an accelerated rate. Monitoring stations dotted the landscape, their displays showing steadily improving air quality. "The first oxygen belt," Professor Elena explained to the assembled media. "Within 5 years, we project a 30% increase in breathable atmosphere in this region. Within 20, potentially a return to self-sustaining ecological cycles." "And anyone can grow these plants?" asked a journalist. "There are no restrictions." "None," Coy confirmed. "The genetic modification techniques have been released as open-source knowledge. Anyone with basic agricultural capabilities can implement them." A hand tugged at his sleeve. Koi looked down to see Lin pointing at something in the distance. "Daddy, look, is that—" He followed her gesture and felt his breath catch. At the far edge of the planted area, barely visible against the still, harsh landscape, was a splash of color that hadn't been there during their last inspection. Wild flowers, unmodified, natural, had taken root amid the engineered plants. "Life, finding a way," Professor Elena murmured, following their gaze. "It always does, when given the chance." Koi lifted Lin onto his shoulders so she could see better. The breeze that reached them carried a scent he hadn't experienced since childhood. The smell of growing things, of chlorophyll and soil and possibility. "Is this what the world was like before?" Lin asked, her voice filled with wonder. "When people could breathe anywhere." "It was," he told her, "and it will be again." Behind them, the dome of Neo Hanoi gleamed in the sunlight, no longer a prison separating humanity from a hostile environment, but a temporary shelter while the healing work continued. Other domes around the world were similarly opening, integrating with the growing oxygen belts that would eventually connect them all. Bao approached, carrying seedlings in a portable growth container. "The next phase is ready. We're expanding 5 kilometers eastward tomorrow." "We'll be there," Koi promised. That evening, as Neo Hanoi's artificial lights dimmed for the night cycle, Koi and Lin stood on the balcony of their new apartment. The Restoration Initiative had repurposed AriCorp's executive residences as housing for key scientific personnel. A practical decision that also carried powerful symbolism. They had removed their masks, breathing the increasingly fresh air that circulated between the dome and the growing fields outside. Oxygen levels were still monitored, but no longer rationed, no longer weaponized against the vulnerable. "Daddy," Lin said thoughtfully, "will I be a scientist like you when I grow up?" Koi smiled. "You can be whatever you choose, Lin. The important thing is that you'll have choices." She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and pointed to the stars, visible through the transparent sections of the dome. "Can we fix the sky too? Make it blue again in the daytime?" "We're working on it," he told her. "The plants will help clean the air of particulates. It will take time, but yes, the sky will be blue again." "Good," she said decisively. "I want to see it. The real sky." "You will," he promised. "We all will." In the laboratory sectors below, scientists from around the world continued their work, building on Koi's breakthrough. Some focused on accelerating atmospheric restoration, others on adapting the modified plants to different environments, from Arctic tundra to desert regions. Each success built upon the last, creating a cascade of healing that spread across the wounded planet. The oxygen merchants had been dethroned. Breathing was becoming, once again, a right rather than a privilege. And in that fundamental shift lay the seeds of a new society, one built on shared resources and cooperative survival rather than exploitation and control. As Lin drifted to sleep that night, Koi thought of all the children who would grow up in this transitional world. They would face challenges, certainly. The damage done to Earth over centuries couldn't be undone in a single generation. But they would face those challenges breathing free air, unburdened by the artificial scarcity that had defined his own life. That alone made everything, the risk, the fear, the struggle, worthwhile. The next morning, Koi joined the planting teams at the expanding edge of the oxygen belt. Lin worked alongside him, her small hands carefully placing seedlings into the gradually recovering soil. Around them, hundreds of others did the same, a human chain of restoration stretching across the landscape. No one wore the insignia of corporations or nations. Those distinctions had begun to fade in the face of their shared work, their shared breath, their shared future. Instead, they wore simple badges bearing the image of a blue lotus, the symbol of Kithon, now adopted by the Global Restoration Initiative as a reminder of what they fought for: pure air, freely available to all. One day, Coy told his daughter as they worked. You'll tell your own children about this time, about how humanity remembered, just in time, that we survived together or not at all. Lynn nodded solemnly, her eyes bright with a vision of the future that now seemed possible. A future where oxygen wasn't a commodity, but a commons. Where breathing wasn't a transaction but a birthright. Above them, through thinning pollution, the sky was beginning to show hints of blue,